If you're a history buff, you must rethink Paul. In the ancient deserts of Judea, long before the rise of Christianity, a group of Jewish mystics believed the heavens could be climbed. They claimed that through secret prayer, ritual purity, and the whispering of divine names, one could ascend into the palaces of heaven, past ranks of angels of fire, to stand before the Chariot-Throne of God, the Merkavah. It was a spiritual adventure unlike any other, dangerous, ecstatic, and transformative. To behold the divine glory, the kavod, was to risk destruction, but also to taste immortality. If you're into mysteries, you should follow the Ascent. This was the world of Merkavah Mysticism, an early form of Jewish esoteric tradition, hidden within the apocalyptic imagination of the Second Temple period. Its followers were not content to worship from afar. They sought direct contact, a vision of God so overwhelming it could remake a person entirely. To them, the cosmos was not abstract theology. It was architecture. 7 heavens stacked one above the other, each guarded by terrifying angels whose names could only be spoken by the pure. Hello followers, welcome back to another episode of the Shadows of History series. If you're into gripping documentaries, deep dives into historical events, hidden truths, and untold stories, you're definitely in the right place. Before we jump in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts. Big shout out to all our new subscribers. Welcome to the family. And to my returning viewers, you already know, you're the real hero. Alright, let's dive into today's story. You're not going to want to miss this one. At the summit, the Merkavah, God's radiant chariot, wheels of fire spinning in silence, surrounded by seraphic beings, crying, "Holy, holy, holy." Those who reached that place, it was said, could gain divine wisdom, command spirits, and even be transformed into angelic beings themselves, eternal, luminous, and unbreakable. But somewhere in the 1st century, this mystical current met an unexpected heir. His name was Saul of Tarsus. We know him as the Apostle Paul, and though history remembers him as a theologian and missionary, modern scholarship is uncovering a different layer beneath his words, a mystical layer, woven with the language and experience of Merkavah Ascent. When Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he mentioned a strange and secret experience. "I know a man in Christ," he said, "but sensi sena wispatsi senso, who was caught up to the 3rd heaven, whether in the body or out of the body I do not know." For centuries, readers treated this as a metaphor, a visionary flourish, but to the mystics of his own time, caught up was no metaphor. It was the language of ascent, it was the code of the Merkavah. Paul, it seems, wasn't just inspired, he had climbed. In the Merkavah tradition, the visionary must pass through successive heavenly realms. The Hek-alot, or palaces, reciting secret hymns to appease fearsome angels. Those who reached the divine throne and survived the vision would return transfigured, their minds forever marked by the light of kavod. When we look again at Paul's letters, his obsession with glory, transformation, and hidden wisdom, they suddenly read less like abstract theology and more like the testimony of a mystic. He speaks of being transformed from glory to glory. He tells believers they are being raised into heavenly places. He describes Christ as the radiance of God's glory, the visible image of the invisible God. It's as if Paul reframed the Merkavah vision itself, placing Christ at its center. Where the Jewish mystic once saw the chariot of God, Paul saw Christ enthroned, shining with divine kavod. To the Jewish mystic, the vision of the Merkavah was the ultimate revelation. To Paul, Christ was that revelation, the living embodiment of the glory once glimpsed only in visions. And just as the ancient mystic believed that beholding God could transform a mortal into an angel, Paul taught that union with Christ could transform believers into new creations, clothed in immortality, infused with divine life. In other words, Paul took the spiritual mechanics of the Merkavah and rewired them for a new faith. The ascent was no longer reserved for the few who mastered secret names. Now, it was open to all, through faith, through grace, through Christ. Recent studies in religious history and textual analysis suggest that Paul's theology, his Christology, his soteriology, even his mystical experiences, likely drew from this Jewish Ascent tradition. The evidence is subtle, but consistent. His visionary claims mirror apocalyptic Ascent accounts. His descriptions of heavenly places align with Second Temple cosmology, and his transformation language echoes the very process described in the Hekkalot and Enochic literature. If so, Christianity's earliest mystical foundations were not invented from scratch. They were rooted in Jewish apocalyptic esotericism, reinterpreted through the lens of Christ. So perhaps when Paul closed his eyes and spoke of glory and transformation, he wasn't just being poetic. He was remembering a journey, one filled with terror and beauty, through a cosmos alive with divine light. And in retelling it, he did what mystics always do. He translated the ineffable into human language. He brought heaven a little closer to earth. From the fiery wheels of Ezekiel's chariot to Paul's vision of the risen Christ, the same longing echoes across the centuries. The longing to ascend, to see, to be transformed by glory. Merkavah mystics sought to storm the heavens. Paul proclaimed that heaven had already descended, that the glory once hidden in the throne now shone in the face of Christ. And in that transformation, mystical, visionary, divine, the foundations of Christianity were laid. Imagine sneaking past a squad of terrifying angels, climbing a ladder of blazing palaces and peeking, just for a moment, at the blazing chariot throne, the Merkavah, where God sits. Now imagine an apostle writing letters that would shape Christianity, sounding like someone who'd just come back from that climb. What if some of the strangest, most mystical strands of early Judaism didn't just disappear into the desert? They were quietly rewired into Paul's theology, Christology, and his picture of salvation. Below is a readable, evidence-aware tour of that idea, what Merkavah, chariot mysticism actually was, how Ascent imagery shows up in Paul, and why many scholars think that Paul's spiritual experiences and language may have been shaped by Jewish apocalyptic Ascent esotericism. What was ancient Jewish Merkavah, chariot mysticism? Merkavah mysticism, literally chariot mysticism, is an early form of Jewish esoteric practice and literature centered on visionary ascents into heaven to behold God's throne, the Merkavah, and the divine glory, kavod. Practitioners describe perilous stage journeys through heavenly palaces, Hekkalot, where one had to pass guardian angels and recite hymns and secret names to proceed. At the climax, the visionary beheld God's throne. That encounter could confer secret knowledge, power, and even the language of transfiguration. Compare the figure of Enoch's elevation into Metatron. The core texts and traditions were later collected in the Hekkalot and Maaseh Merkabah literature, though the stream clearly draws on earlier apocalyptic and prophetic visions, Ezekiel, 1 Enoch, from the Second Temple period. Key features to remember: Ascent, where Paul's own writings echo Ascent mysticism. Paul's letters, especially 2 Corinthians 12, contain a remarkable first-person report. He speaks of being caught up to the third heaven and of a vision so overwhelming he won't boast except in weakness. That language, being caught up into heaven, a first-person mystical ascent, encounters with heavenly beings, and an authority grounded in visionary experience, closely parallels the genre of Jewish Ascent literature. Scholars have long noted that Paul's vocabulary, e.g., heavenly places, eperanioi, visions, angels, the structural parallels, a staged ascent and peril, and his use of secret knowledge motifs make the Merkavah context a plausible matrix for reading these passages. Two short but important points. How Merkavah ideas could have shaped Paul's theology and soteriology. If we accept that Paul moved in an environment where Ascent mysticism was current, and many scholars say there was a currency of such traditions within late Second Temple Judaism, Then, several features of Pauline thought look less like isolated inventions and more like adaptations of Ascent mystical motifs. A. Divine glory, kavod, Christological center. Merkavah mystics yearn to behold the kavod. Paul repeatedly ties the revelation of God's glory to Christ, e.g., Christ as the manifestation or locus of God's glory and the means by which believers share in that radiance. Read side by side, Paul's Christocentric language about revelation and glory resonates with an Ascent mystic's account of beholding and being suffused by the divine presence. B. Transformation and becoming heavenly. Merkavah texts promise radical transformation, even into angel-like status, Enoch, Metatron. Paul's in Christ language talk of a resurrected heavenly body, and phrases like raised in the heavenly places can be read as a Christianized version of mystic transformation, salvation as entry into a shared, transformed participation in heavenly life. Paul's sacramental and mystical idioms, baptism, union with Christ, can function like the ritual passwords and hymns of the Ascent schools, means by which one is prepared for, admitted to, and changed by the divine presence. C. Authority grounded in visionary Ascent. For Merkavah practitioners, visionary Ascent constituted the highest kind of religious authority. One who'd seen the throne could teach about divine realities. Paul's self-presentation, his visions, his occasional insistence that he won't boast except about the visions, fits that model. He claims a heavenly qualification rather than merely scriptural pedigree. Scholars examining 2 Corinthians identify exactly this function for Paul's Ascent report. No G. So, did Paul practice Merkavah mysticism? We must be cautious. There is no smoking gun line in Paul like I performed the Heckalot rites. What we have are converging lines of evidence. So, while we cannot prove Paul completed Heckalot rituals, the hypothesis that Paul's vision language and some of his theological moves are decisively shaped by Ascent mysticism is well grounded and increasingly taken seriously in scholarship. Why this matters for how we read early Christianity. If Christianity inherited significant framing from Jewish Ascent mysticism, several implications follow. Think of Merkavah mystics as ancient spiritual climbers, scaling the cosmic Everest to glimpse the God summit. Paul? He's the apostle who writes the guidebook after a climb, sometimes in cryptic ecstatic footnotes. The result? Core Christian ideas, union with Christ, revelation of glory, heavenly citizenship, sound a lot like someone translating a mystic's afterglow into letters to congregations. No incense required, but plenty of visionary swag. Ancient Merkavah mystics aimed to spiritually ascend toward God. They climbed past terrifying guardian angels to glimpse the kavod. That vision wasn't mere awe. The texts promise real power. These texts promise power. They promise transformation. They promise becoming an angelic being. Shocker. Recent scholarship argues Paul was steeped in this tradition. Paul's claims line up with Merkavah practices, an ascent to the third heaven. His reported visions match Merkavah experiences. His mystical language echoes Merkavah vocabulary. More striking, Paul's ideas echo Ascent themes. Ideas about Christ reflect Ascent themes. Ideas about salvation reflect Ascent themes. Heavenly status is emphasized in his writings. Divine revelation is central to these themes. Spiritual transformation recurs in Paul's theology. Participation in heavenly realities appears throughout. Early Christian theology may have been built on an older Jewish roadmap, one that taught ascent, encounter with the divine, interchange, and transformation. Thanks for watching Shadows of History series. My goal is to bring forgotten stories and hidden moments from the past back to life, to explore the parts of history that often stay in the shadows. Each episode takes a lot of research, writing, and editing to make sure every detail is right and every story is told with care. If you'd like to help me keep creating these documentaries and grow this channel, you can support Shadows of History series on Buy Me a Coffee. Your support helps me make more videos, dive deeper into research, and build stronger connections with viewers who love history as much as I do. Every bit of support, even one coffee, truly helps bring more stories from the shadows into the light. Thank you for watching, for sharing, and for being part of this journey.